Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Grant Trends and Common Mistakes. Make your 2019 applications shine. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So all callers will be muted. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. If you lose your internet connection, just try reconnecting using the link that was emailed to you. If you have to drop off early or if you want to watch the webinar again, we will be hosting the webinar on our website at TechSoup.org/community/events-webinars. You'll also be receiving an email with the presentation, the recording, and any relevant links. If you're on social media, feel free to tweet at us at TechSoup using hashtag #TSWebinars. But like I said earlier, we'll be using the chat box that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. Also, I wanted to point out that today's webinar is actually 90 minutes and not 60 minutes, and I think some of you might have had 60 minutes on your confirmation, so we apologize for the mix-up, but hopefully you'll be able to stay on for the entire 90 minutes. If not, we will definitely be sending out the recording and the slides afterwards if you want to watch it on your own time. So just a little bit about TechSoup before we get started. We are located in 236 countries and territories. We offer discounted and donated hardware and software to over 1 million nonprofits around the world. And we partner with technology companies such as Adobe, Intuit, Microsoft, Symantec, and several more. One of our technology partners is also GrantStation. And I wanted to let you guys know that we have a GrantStation special offer happening on February 12th and 13th. And if you're interested in getting notified about this offer coming up next week, my colleague Zareen will be chatting out this link to you guys if you want to submit your email to get notified when the sale is kicked off. So I'm going to go ahead and make introductions. So my name is Seema Tucker. I'm the Senior Manager of Content here at TechSoup. My colleague Zareen Kazi is the Marketing Associate at TechSoup, and she will be helping on the back end to answer questions. And then we have our main presenter, Alice Runke, who's the founder and owner of the Grant Advantage. And for those of you who don't know, the Grant Advantage is a progressive, innovative consulting business devoted to helping nonprofit organizations unleash their strengths to embrace tomorrow's opportunities. Located in Charleston, West Virginia, the Grant Advantage's services include grant writing, funding searches, capacity building assistance, and learning opportunities through trainings, workshops, webinars, and manuals. Alice has raised over $29 million writing federal, state, foundation, and corporate grants and has been in charge of awarding and monitoring federal funds to nonprofit organizations throughout West Virginia. If Alice is not at her computer writing, she can usually be found facilitating trainings for individuals and organizations. Alice is also the author of Mapping the Course, A Practical Approach to Grant Writing, a practical step-by-step manual that walks through an entire grant proposal from start to finish. So before I hand it off to Alice, I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. So if you don't mind just chatting in the chat box, what city you're calling in from, and I'll read a couple of them out and then I'll pass it on to Alice. All right, so we have Portland, Oregon, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Austin. Okay, so it seems like you guys can hear me okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and now pass it off to Alice.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Seema, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. Really excited to have so many people on the line and people ready to kind of figure out what's going on in the grant world today and a little bit tomorrow. And figuring out kind of how we put all the pieces together and make applications that are strong and competitive. But before we get started, I just have a couple of questions for you just so I can kind of figure out who's in our virtual classroom here. We've got people from all over the place. But if you could just answer the question there, has your organization ever gotten a grant? Either yes or no, or you don't know is fine too. And we'll just kind of figure out kind of where people are at and people are answering here. So it kind of looks like that a lot of you guys have written grants, the majority of you, but some of you are pretty new to the game. So I think that the webinar is going to be helpful for those new and some of those that are novices that just need to kind of hone in on their skills and things like that. And then I just have one more question just about you personally, like how much you know about grant writing, again, just to help me gauge my examples and my kind of instructions as I go through. So kind of from, you don't know what is a grant, all the way to you should be here facilitating the webinar. So if you could just plug that answer in there, we'll kind of get a figure of kind of where our skill level is before we get started. So, and I see some of you are typing it into the chat box, which is fine too. Here's just kind of so you know where we're at. Some people are really new to the process, and again, it looks like some people have had some success, and then those that should be teaching, we need to talk because there's a lot of awesome grant writing teaching that needs to be done in this world. So I'm really glad to have you here, and this just really helps me, again, just frame up my examples and instructions as we go through. So here's what we're going to do in our 90 minutes. Oops. There we go. Is we're going to just start with kind of what the grant trends are, just kind of looking forward into the rest of 2019 and 2020, with just some kind of good educated guesses on my part based on what I see in the industry and what my colleagues see and that kind of thing, just to get us kind of where some direction is going with the grant writing world. And then we'll look at kind of the basics of an application and kind of what it is specifically that funders are looking for. Because I think the trick with all of grants is that really funders are looking for the same things. It's just that they all use different terminology and they use a different format and things like that makes it seem like every grant is different. And while while you do want to follow what each funder puts out in their application, there are real basic components that really everybody's looking for. So we'll go through that and figure out ways that we can enhance those sections for ourselves. And then we'll have just some kind of common mistakes that I see a lot. I stay real active in grant review because I think that being a grant reviewer makes you a better grant writer. So I see a lot of, and then I see a lot of mistakes just from clients when I get to read old grants or that kind of thing of kind of where they maybe didn't put enough emphasis or strengthen their applications. So just some kind of common things and some solutions that I think will just help you. And then I wanted to provide time for those question and answers because again we do have a large group and I know people always have a lot of questions, so I wanted to save some good time there. So I don't think it's much of a stretch to share this trend here of grants becoming more and more competitive. And I like the little guys running too. I think that's kind of cute, but that's not the point. But anyway, just looking at, some sources where, funds are there, there's no new funds or funds are dwindling. You see a lot of cases where more nonprofits are being developed and coming into the world of competing for grants, which makes it more competitive. And people needing our services, are still there, and in some cases, that's becoming more and more. So I don't think that we want to enter into the grant world real lightly. I think that we, have to realize that it is, a competition when we're out there, and hopefully today what you're going to learn are some ways to make your applications as strong as possible and to kind of get up towards the head of the pack there. So I have a number of different trends that I'm just going to talk about. I also saw some of these, and they were kind of confirmed through an article that was written on the GrantStation website. And so some of these are kind of mine, and some of these are my colleagues, and some of these are from GrantStation. So they have even additional ones if you want to go check that out. But one of the things that I think that we're seeing more is where funders, especially like the for-profit funders, are really trying to connect more to a cause in their own marketing or their own kind of message to the world. And you can kind of see this just like even in the Super Bowl, commercials where like one of my favorites was just the Microsoft where they had the gaming systems for that anybody could use with any ability and that kind of thing. And so I think that that's a trend that's going to continue. So depending on the work that you do, or if you do any sort of advocacy, or have something where your cause could be connected to a product that's out there on the market, that could just be a really good inroad for you to think about, and think about potentially making some sort of connection with those for-profit businesses to develop a relationship where the cause and the product are kind of connected. It's a good way to get monies from them and get their support for your cause. So that's something that I see as happening more and more and likely to continue. I do think that there's going to be kind of greater competition out there for things like that are related to like poverty-related programs, like your food programs or your emergency service programs, those kinds of things. Again, I don't see any decrease in people needing those services, and yet I don't see any really new dollars out there to help. So I think that those kind of areas are going to have greater competition than like the area of like the substance abuse and opioids. That I am seeing more funds and from both the state and the federal level to address substance abuse and that kind of thing, and the state level as well, at least for us here in West Virginia anyway. So I think that that's an area that you will see some growth if that's the kind of work that you do. I think that there will be trends to kind of combat some of the substance abuse issues going on in the country. And then here's just kind of the last three trends that I want to talk about. Just first, that I think that funders are moving more towards funding strategic initiatives where people are partnering together. And so, but I see this as more than just a partnership. I mean, we have to have partnerships in doing what we're doing, but I think what I'm seeing more is that like funders are saying like, let's get a group of people who are addressing some of the root causes of some of the problems in our community, and then strategically looking at that and funding different pieces of that pie based on the groups working together. So throughout the webinar we will have some more resources and information on you just about how to kind of do that, and just ways to kind of think through that for yourself. But that's the trend that I don't see changing in the near future at all. With corporate funding, so ever since like 2008 when kind of the stock market crashed and funding for nonprofits really went down because foundations didn't have their endowments, bringing in the kind of money anymore and that kind of thing, and it really threw the nonprofit world for a loop because, that was a really hard time. But ever since that time, ever since that 2008 kind of crash, corporations have increased the amount of funding every year except for one. Okay, so just 1 year there was a dip. But other than that, from 2008 to current to 2000, and I think the 18 data is out. Well, no, I'm sorry, the 17 data is out. They've increased. But they've increased more, not so much in real cash and giving out real dollars, but in giving out like in-kind services and supports. And so I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide real quick and then come back to this. But where you've seen a change or an increase in their donations is where they're giving, say, away more of their furniture and computers and copiers and things like that they maybe aren't using or that they've upgraded or something, and kind of donating those things more to the nonprofit community. And then also providing some services like letting people use, say, their space for a free cost, or just providing some sort of like kind of overhead kind of support for people needing to do mailings or copying and things like that. But probably the biggest one is this kind of expertise in-kind donation. And so where they're giving of their staff and the expertise of their staff to provide that support out in the nonprofit community. So, maybe they'll be out there helping with, doing the taxes for a nonprofit, where they provide that their people in their accounting department to help a nonprofit do their taxes, or they'll help a nonprofit, with their marketing campaign. And develop their website and help with that kind of outreach, or they'll help with like strategic planning or something like that, where they're giving the time of their people to help you out. So I think that this is just a really good, because this is where that increase is coming from of their donations, it's just something to think about and try to think in your own community, where you could again partner with a corporation or something to get some of that support. Because then if you don't have to pay for that marketing campaign, then the monies that you would need for that, you wouldn't either have to raise in other ways, or you already have it, you don't have to spend it in that way. You can spend it on something else. So I think that that's a trend that, again, like I said, they've increased that way ever since 2008, and I see that continuing. And then also I see this a lot, where the corporations, only will fund nonprofits that their employees are engaged with. So that their funding recommendations come from their employees who say, yeah, I volunteer at this organization. I can vouch for them and recommend that they get funding and that kind of thing. So that's where again, just thinking about your own community, thinking about what potential partnerships you could make there, could really kind of help with some inroads into getting grants from those organizations, in addition to all that human resource support that you're getting through that volunteer opportunities that they're providing. And then finally, the last trend that I just want to talk about, and I think this is just a best practice, and I'm not much of a preacher or anything, but this is kind of sometimes where I get preachy. But I think it's really important, and more funders are asking that you do this, that we involve those that we serve in the design of our programs. And that makes perfect sense, because if we don't involve the people that we serve, then we don't know if those strategies that we're putting together are going to be effective in meeting their needs. We're going to be kind of guessing, right? Sitting in our offices, sitting in front of our computers and saying, I know what you need, without asking you what you need. And I made that mistake one time when I worked in a nonprofit, and I was doing capacity building work. And we would provide these free trainings around the state, and I would, it would be like grant writing and strategic planning and all that kind of stuff, but we wanted to do some technology-related capacity building. And so keeping in mind, this is like, over 15 years ago, so it was before you could just sit down and make a website sitting on your couch, But what I thought was, okay, we'll have these free trainings, and we'll do it about what nonprofits need how you develop a technology plan for your organization, and then how, what the different aspects you could put together for a website and how they could benefit you and help your nonprofit. And so anyway, I offer these free trainings, and I find, I offer them at like 4 places around the state, and again, they're free, and I got like 8 people to show up which is really bad. With all of our other trainings, we had every seat filled. We'd get 40 or 50 people there without even batting an eye. And so, my thought was like, well, what am I doing wrong? What was so wrong about these workshops? And then I thought, well, Alice, why don't you ask the nonprofits that you serve what their technology needs are, right? So I just did a survey, we did a survey, monkey survey of just, what are your needs? And they came back to me with they want to know how to use Microsoft Access to keep databases of their funders. Or we want to learn how to use PowerPoint to make presentations, or Publisher to make our brochures and stuff. They wanted that real hands-on, tangible stuff, right? But because I didn't ask them the first time, then I just assumed what they needed, and I was wrong. And then when I involved them and said, well, what are your needs, then I was able to have these real hands-on, in-computer lab types of trainings where people could sit down and learn how to use the software. And that's what they needed. And so that's why a funder would want you to include those that you serve, because it just makes perfect sense. It just really helps us to really make sure that we're asking for resources to do something that's going to matter. So that's a trend that I see, and I see more funders asking that question, and I think it's a good question to ask. So that's something that you'll want to think about doing as you're developing your programs. So those are the trends that I'm seeing, and now I want to kind of start to explore more of that kind of what is it that funders really want in our applications. And I think that this slide is a real key way to kind of orient your thinking around grants. And I got this from I think it was an article on the Grantsmanship Institute site, and I just thought it was perfect because it really is just written so directly about what funders and organizations, how you should think about grants. So a funder is providing a grant to invest in positive change in the community, and so they're giving you as a nonprofit some money to make something good happen in the community. And they have the resources of money, right? And you're the arm and legs, and so of them. You're able to go out and do work and connect in your community and make that positive change. Okay? For an organization like yourself, it's a tool that you use to address issues in the community. You have other resources that help you address those issues. Money isn't the only thing. You have human resources. You have partnerships. You have, different, resources at your disposal, if it's tangible buildings or whatever. So it's a tool. It's part of a piece of the pie to help you address things. It's not the only thing, right? I mean, you need more than just money. You also need all those other things. And then really grants are about their impact rather than about the money. And kind of going to a funder and your first the first thing out of your mouth is, I need money, I need a building, I need staff, I need a roof on my building, I need whatever it is that I need, right? That's not compelling to a funder. Everybody can come to a funder and tell them what they need, right? What you want to talk about is what impact you could have with their money, how you change things, and their money would be part of that support. And so I think that having this mentality is going to be more helpful as you go out there and approach funds, because funders don't like to be treated like an ATM machine, where it's just like you're just coming to them and saying, I need this and I need that. They want to see that change that needs to happen in their communities. And so that's what they're funding, not your organization. They're funding that change. Okay? So I think this is just a great orientation as to how we should be thinking about grants and approaching funders. And one of the things that I do in every grant that I write and how I put this out there is that we come from a strengths-based perspective. That we're, again, out there showing that you are an organization that gets things done and makes things happen. Again, not a needy organization that's going to go out of business if they don't fund you. Again, that's just not compelling. I can find you 20 organizations that are going to go out of business if they don't have money. That doesn't mean anything to me. But if I can demonstrate that I have solutions, and here's how I do it, and that's what I'm talking about, again, and that's what makes your application compelling to a funder. So throughout, in all the sections that we're going to be talking about in a grant application, I'm always putting myself out there, or my clients out there, as strong organizations worthy of support because of what they do and how they do it. So kind of specifically, what do funders want when they're out there asking for you to submit grant applications? That these are kind of, again, the common sections of a grant application. They're all called, every section here, there's 20 different names that a funder is going to call it, right? But these are like the common things that they're going to want and they're going to ask for in basically almost every application. And so, again, they're going to ask for them in a different order. They're going to use different terminology. And you want to format it the way that they ask for it, in the order that they ask for it, using the terms that they use and that kind of thing. But what I want you to realize as we go through this webinar is that these are the common things, and once you kind of plan it out and put all your pieces together, then it's easier to take your plan and connect it into the way the funder wants to see the application, again, in the right order and using their terms. So I'm going to kind of go through just real briefly, like organizational background. Again, this is generally when you're showing your strengths of all the things that you've done. It would have a brief, a short history of your organization, so you can show that you've, been around for X amount of years, and and been in a community, valued part of the community, and then showing how people's lives have changed because of what you do. So talking about your programs and how people have changed, the difference that you've made as an organization. Okay. And so there's more to it and that kind of stuff, but that's basically you're trying to kind of establish yourself as a credible organization here, right? And so again, one funder could call it the profile of the applicant organization, and another funder will call it organizational background. Don't get too hooked up on the terminology. Realize that you're going to have to probably have a section that demonstrates your strengths. Get that written, and then you can format it the way the funder specifically is asking for it. A second thing, besides kind of your background, is that a funder is going to ask for the need for the project. And so that's when you're talking about the data and using citing sources and talking about the struggles that people are experiencing in your organization, in your community, the people that you serve, and what they're struggling with, and why they're struggling with that. What is lacking in a service or that you provide or that somebody else provides. So, and I have another chart as we go through this that's going to connect all these pieces for us as well. So I think that but we always have to talk about what needs it is that we're addressing in the community. And the other critical part here is when we talk about the need, we're not talking about your needs as an organization. So again, this isn't where you start to go, I need this and I need that. This is where you're saying people in the community are hurting, and whatever target population you're dealing with, you're providing that data to show what their needs are. Okay? Another section that you're going to generally be asked to say is how are people going to change? And I'm just using the term outcomes for that. Some other funders might use the term goals or objectives or impact or what are your results going to be or whatever. But this is where you say how the people that you serve are going to change. So we had the needs section, and we talked about how many people were struggling with whatever it was that we're dealing with, and if it's illiteracy or drug addiction or homelessness or whatever. Now we're going to say, well, how many people are going to get a home or be in recovery or I can't remember my first example now, but whatever it was, how many people are going to change to the positive, become, increase their reading skills, that kind of thing. Another thing that a funder always asks you for is, what is your approach? So what are you going to do? What are the steps you need to take to have that outcome that you want to have, to have that impact on those that you serve? And so this is where you want to put in a good amount of detail about, who's going to do what and where and when and why and how. How is this all going to happen? Walk them through your program. Walk them through how, the steps you're going to take and what you're going to do with their money, okay? And then they usually ask for some sort of evaluation where you say specifically how you're going to measure things, what tools you're going to use, how are you going to measure that impact, how are you going to measure your approach, those kinds of things. And you generally talk in more detail about the overall piece of your evaluation. And then finally, it's you'll be requested to put in a project budget. So kind of whatever you're asking for money for, you outline that and have some justifications as to why you're asking for those amounts and those kinds of things. And always making sure that that budget that you're asking for money for, that you're connecting it to your approach. So whatever monies you're asking for, you're describing how it's being used when you're writing your approach section. Okay? So those two things should connect. This should all tell one really coherent story all the way through. And I think that one of the reasons that people maybe don't like to write grants, or why they think grants might be confusing, is because the first thing that they do is they get the instructions. So every funder has their set of instructions, and they all call it something different, right? But they have a set of instructions that tell you what you have to submit, what questions you have to answer, all those details, right? And some of them get down to sometimes they get down to what font you can use, how many pages you can use, how many characters you can use when it's an online account. So it can get really, really detailed. Others aren't too bad, but some of their instructions can be really, really detailed, and you want to pay attention to all of them. Okay, but my point was that you get that set of instructions, and then people just sit down and they just start to write the answers to the application, right, without putting any thought into the planning of the program and the planning of telling the story of the grant, that you're requesting money for. And so then, if you read the grant application, it's it can be very disjointed because what people wrote in the beginning, it didn't follow through, and so you put this need stuff in here that you never addressed through your approach, and so it's why was that data in there? And and then just the pieces aren't connected. You get to the budget, and then you look at the approach, and those two things don't connect, and it's well, I don't understand what they're asking for money for, So what we want to do is to spend more of our time in the planning of our grant applications and our programs. And if we spend that 80% of the time in that planning stage, then it isn't hard to take that information out of our planning and write up the answers, again, in the way that the funder wants it, in the format that they want it, and the structure that they want it, okay? And so that's what I teach, that's just what I teach and preach all over the place, is how do we do that? How do we do that planning? Because I am finding that kind of the level of detail of what a funder is asking for is just becoming much more rigorous. With that increased competition, they got to figure out how to, not make applications harder necessarily, but how do you know a good one from a bad one, and kind of the levels of detail that you're providing generally can help a funder determine either yes, they know what they're doing, or no, that they don't. They're not putting in enough information. So this is what I teach. when I'm teaching grants, and this is what I use when I plan out any grant. And this is just a framework that I made, and it comes from, I kind of merged two different kind of processes with it, two things that I saw from two different groups, and I kind of took the best of both worlds, I feel like, and put them into this one planning. And so you can also download a copy of this from our website, from the Grant Advantages website. But you can see here that these are all kind of the same words that I used back when we were talking about each section of a grant, right, or what the common sections are. So, again, up here, well, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go to the next slide where I have some explanations of kind of what the purpose of each section is, right? So just kind of realizing again that you're going to want to have something written up in these and a kind of a plan in all of these, but then you don't have to worry. Once you get it all planned out, you don't have to worry about what the funder calls it. You worry about that after you've developed this, and then you figure out what the funder called it. So, you're going to have that background section that establishes your organization's credibility, right? You're going to have that clear definition of what problems that your clients or population that you serve, what they're experiencing, right? And from that, from knowing what the data is, the baseline here and now data, then you're going to identify how people are going to change. So those things are going to move right into one another. Okay? And then with our indicators, those are going to be then how are we going to measure that change. Okay? So you can see that if you plan this whole thing out, hopefully you'll see it, that all of the pieces of your application are going to connect, right? And it's going to be a real coherent, smooth story about what you do and how you do it. After you, again, get that data of what people are experiencing, then you're going to look at, well, why are people having that problem? What are the root causes of, homelessness, of kids dropping out of school, of illiteracy, whatever it is that you deal with? What are some of those root causes? Because if you figure out what those root causes are, then you can develop some sort of approach to deal with those root causes, right? So, we have to do a little bit of that analysis so that we know, again, that what we're doing is going to make a difference. And so this is where, down here is where you want to make sure that specifically, that you're including those that you serve in the design of your program so that you can identify what's really going on. Why are you, experiencing homelessness? What do we need to do to address that? And so you would figure that out, you develop an approach, and then you'd figure out, how do you measure what you did? So just kind of quantifying what you do, just to be able to go back and demonstrate to the funder that you spent the money doing the things you said you were supposed to do, and figuring out how to make your services better. And then our budget is really tied in. Now I'm getting a lot of arrows, but our budget is really tied in with our approach, right? So if we're asking for money for a staff member, then that's what that staff member is going to do should be talked about in the approach. If we ask for money for equipment, how that money is going to be, how that equipment is going to be used is going to be discussed in the approach. So that when the reviewer gets to the final end, they've read this whole story about who you are and who you serve and what you're going to change and how you're going to do it, right? And then the budget should just be seamless. It should be almost like you can anticipate exactly what they're going to ask for, right, based on the story that you just told. And there shouldn't be any surprises in the budget of like, well, where did this consultant come from? This is the first time I'm hearing that this consultant is needed. You know what I mean? Is in the budget form because you didn't talk about it in the rest of the grant application. So this method is just this is the way I think through every grant. This is the way I teach grants. If it's, a 1 hour thing or a 2-day thing or whatever, it's how do we do this and do this part really well, okay? So So that's, again, basically, this is what a funder's looking for, right? Those are the things that they're looking for. Some things that I see, again, as things that nonprofits need to be working on are these three things here, and we'll talk more detail as we go through. So the first one is kind of having matching funds, and we'll talk about what that is, and making those meaningful partnerships, and that'll we have some resources there. And then creating that outcome measurement system, right? Because some of us aren't doing that, right? We're not measuring the change that we have in people. We're measuring how many people we served and that kind of thing, but we're not measuring the change in the clients because of our services. And we need to be doing that. So those are three things that I think that really need, to be enhanced to increase your competitiveness in the grant world. So we'll just start with matching funds. And so for some funders, they'll have a required match, or some funders don't have a required match. And so what that is they'll either say something like, this is a 50-50 match. So, if we put in, or if you're 100%, I guess, if you're asking for $10,000, we want you to have $10,000 coming from somewhere else. Okay. So sometimes it's required. Other times it's not required. But when you're working at the local level, you're working with your local community foundations, your United Ways, your local businesses, those kinds of things, they don't like to be the only funder in a project. I mean, if you don't have any other support for this project besides them, you have no other resources, then it's like, well, why would I support you if nobody else is supporting you? Not one other, group or, human resources, anything. Why would I fund it 100%? And so when I'm working at a local level, I'm always finding match, okay, even if it's not requested, right? So I'm showing them that other people have skin in the game as well. Now, as a caveat, though, I don't do that at the federal and state level. If there's a required match at the federal and state level, then my clients have to come up with that required match. But I don't add match at the federal and state level unless it's required. Okay? But I do at a local level. And so you can find matching funds in a couple of ways, one being through real dollars, and another way being through in-kind donations. So when we're looking at real dollars, then it could be money that your organization has from interest on investments or things like that, that your organization generates dollars from somewhere, or charges people for services or something like that, where you have money, in your bank, and you say, we'll match part of this grant with our own money. Or you can use, if you get donations from people, then you can use that as match. Or if you have fundraisers and things like that, the money that you raise through your fundraisers, you can use as match. And then most of the time you can match other grants with grants. Again, generally not at the federal level, but you generally can when you're just talking local grants. So you could see, for example, sometimes, let's say you have a program and you wanted to have a coding club, let's say for kids. And so what you need for that is you need some staff people, some staff time, and you need equipment. So to one funder, you go asking for the funds for the equipment, and another funder, you go asking for money for the staff, and then you put that together, and those grants match one another, right? So you can match grant to grant in a project. But sometimes real money is hard to come by. I know that as well. And so using in-kind donations is also a really great way to match. So probably the one that's going to add up the quickest is when you start to look at your volunteer activity. And each year, this group called the Independent Sector publishes the value of a volunteer hour. And they do it for the United States as a whole, and then they break it down state by state. So like the most current is 2017, and so like in West Virginia, it's $21.10 an hour is the value of a volunteer hour, right? So let's say in that same grant that we were just talking about for the coding club, let's say that that you had volunteers coming in to do the training or do the work with the students. You can value the value of their time at whatever it is for your state, and put that as an in-kind match, because that's needed to make your program go, right? I mean, you need that volunteer to be providing that service. It's part of what you're doing. And so if it's paid or not paid, there's still a value to it. And this calculation by the independent sector is pretty widely known and respected as what the value of that dollar is. So if I come in and I sweep the floors up after your events or whatever, and make the foods and that kind of thing, and get the treats ready for the kids or whatever, then you can value my time in West Virginia at $21.10 an hour. You do have to keep this like a real employee. Like this you have to document this stuff. So you have to have your volunteers, at the end of each week or at the end of each session or whatever, just sign up, sign I worked for these 2 hours or whatever. So it does have to be documented. You can't just kind of go willy-nilly out there. But this can add up super fast when you think about all the volunteer time that you probably have of people helping out your programs and your organization. One of the things that's also really cool with this, though, if the volunteer that's coming in is doing work, that's the work that they do in their professional lives, then that value can be what their professional fee is. So let's say you have nurses that come in and say do stuff with your families in your program or something once a month. Then you can value that nursing time at whatever it is that the nurse gets paid for in real life, and not the $21.10 an hour, right? So, if people are providing, you have people, that come in and provide a professional service, then you can value that at the actual value of their professional time. Again, you need to have that documented. If that nurse comes in and does nursing for you, right, again, the value of her professional time. If that nurse comes in and sweeps up the floor at the end of the day and isn't providing nursing, then she's at the $21.10 an hour. Okay? But this can add up super fast. Any sort of discounts that you might get, again, could be added as in-kind support. So let's say you have, let's say you rent space, and the fair market value or whatever, they rent to other people this space. It's $200 an hour, but they give it to you for $25 an hour. Well, that discounted cost that you get, again, if you get it in writing, that can be in-kind support of what you have to support your programs. And then any donations that you get can be in-kind support. Okay, somebody donates the computers, right? Well, then you have your project budget, and instead of it being the donated staff time, it's the donated computer time or computer cost. All right. So these are really good ways to help, again, the funder see that you are not, just going out there 100% asking them for everything, but just realize this stuff does need to be tracked. Right? I mean, you have to track those in-kind contributions. And so I do just have some resources there. There's a good article, or no, Cindy's this is a free webinar on the GrantStation website that you can get even more ideas than what I just came up with. And then the tracking one is done by this guy that does the QuickBooks stuff or has a company there. So those are just good sources to help you as you kind of are developing that. The second big area is partnerships. Again, really looking at who else in the community is doing the kind of work you do, and kind of being able to identify how you are unique or different from one another, how you are maybe the same from each other, and how you can partner together. So there's obviously the idea of partnering with like-minded organizations, right, to get some efficiencies of scale going there. And then really looking at, what other groups are out there that can help support you and how you can help them, right? So I have a couple of ideas here on how we would do that. So kind of the first one kind of starts with doing that root cause analysis of, like I was talking about in the planning matrix. So where that you have, you've already identified how many people are homeless, how many people are dropping out of school, right? You have all that data, and then asking yourself that question, now why? Why does this problem exist, right? So you can read through all those. Why are people unhealthy? Why are they dropping out of school? Why? And when we do that root cause analysis, one of the things that we're going to find is there are probably, with the things that you're doing, there are probably lots of reasons why people are struggling. It's generally not just one, root cause, right? I mean, generally there's a lot of different root causes. And doing that root cause analysis can help you then identify where you can have partners to come in and help you, and where also you can help those partners. So looking at that, so let's say you have an after-school program because kids are doing really bad in their math and reading scores, and so again you have the data already established, right? And then you bring in those kids from your school, and you're like, okay, parents and students, why are you struggling with these math and English scores? What's going on, And you could find lots of reasons why they're struggling. Could be that the parents don't have the skills to help them. It could be that youth don't care about what's going on today and what good today is with connecting to tomorrow. It could be that they don't have any tutoring. It could be that they don't have any resources to technology after they get out of school. So again, with most of the things that you are dealing with, there's going to be lots of root causes. And the thing that's the beauty of doing that analysis is that you can also look at where can I partner. So I see here that the parents don't have the skills, right, and I realize that. But I don't need to start an adult basic education program. That already exists in my community. What I want to do is partner with adult basic education and bring them, bring my parents to them and bring them to my parents, right, to help these kids out. I realize that youth don't have any of the technology resources, but I learned that the school board is now providing iPads to the kids, to every kid, right? So I can bring in that support that the county board is providing through those iPads and incorporate those iPads into my program, right? And then I don't have to ask for money for it. I can just incorporate what they're doing right into my program, right? So there you're seeing partnerships already develop and using resources in your community. However, there's nothing going on to help the kids kind of fill in that gap of that mentoring and seeing how what they're doing today will help them in their futures. So that's part of the program that we're going to do. We're going to bring in people to kind of do that mentoring and whatever that work is, seeing kind of that motivational type work. And then there's no tutoring, so we're going to provide that, right? So doing that root cause analysis, again, it can help you build meaningful partnerships. And I also have a resource here that you can use, and you can download this on our website as well, where it's just a partnership identification tool. It's just a kind of a quick and easy kind of look at looking at what businesses could support us. Okay, again, connecting back to where corporations are, right, and how they're giving, and then how other resources can support us, and how we can support them, right? So looking at yourself as an asset, mostly with the business, what they're going to see, what you're going to be able to provide to them is you're going to be able to provide that advertising and that increase their level of exposure in the community, and that's something that's a value to them, right? So, and then what you want from them is some money or some volunteers or whatever it is that you're looking for. So always positioning yourself, again, from that position of strength. And so, again, you can come back and look at these and again, download it if you want. But, it's just, businesses that are located where you're at, businesses where your board, your volunteers, where they work, where the people that you serve work, that kind of thing. People who sell to your board members, to your clients, to your volunteers. People that you buy things from, okay, corporations that you buy things from, and then affinity corporations, and those again going back to that kind of cause-related stuff, those organizations that are connected in with like what you do. So let's say you serve people with mobility issues, and so you connect in with an organization that provides sells or rents the walkers and the canes and the wheelchairs and things like that. And then I just have another kind of hodgepodge of just, let's look broadly as to how we can connect in our communities with social service agencies and schools and communities of faith and civic groups and the women's club and the government and all those kinds of things, and look really broadly as to how these other groups you could connect in with them to create change that you're looking for. So just a resource there. When developing that outcome measurement system as the kind of final piece of where I think there needs to be some built capacity in there for nonprofits to be more competitive, that again, you want to have that system where you measure the changes in the people that you serve, and setting up that process. We are having a webinar tomorrow that talks about everything kind of we talked about here, just in more detail. And then we're doing one specifically just on that outcome thing in 2 weeks. So those are some resources as you're kind of going out there and trying to develop that system. And I think it's really important that we do. And again, this is where I do get a little bit on my soapbox, because we do want to decide and determine what changes we're making in the lives of those that we serve. Because if we know what difference we make, well, number one, we can see if we're really making that difference, right? And if we're not, then we can improve our services or change our services and improve to have the change that we want to see. And then once we know that we're making a difference in people's lives, and we have that kind of documented, and we have that story to tell, then we use that to tell our story really widely, right? We don't just do this just for a funder, right? We do this because that's how we get staff and volunteers to help support us, right? We use that in our marketing to get new participants. We use that just to garner support from the community as a whole, and building our organization up. So I think it's really critical that we do this. Again, a lot of people start because a funder asked them to, right, to measure those outcomes. But more and more, it's just really something that's just it's needed, that we're actually measuring that we're making the difference in people's lives that we are anticipating. So now I'm going to go through, so that's kind of how we kind of work to make our applications better and some workarounds. And then so now I'm just going to go through what kind of just some common mistakes are and give you a few tips, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So again, sometimes I find that people's applications are actually pretty boring, and they don't engage me. It's just kind of like they just kind of answered questions and didn't write in a way that as a reader that excited me, right? And so I think what's really critical that we realize that when we're writing our grants, right, we want to write with the reviewer in mind. If that's sometimes it's a paid staff at a foundation, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's just people in the community that volunteer, people like you and me that care about the community, and they volunteer their time to review grants. And so, when you realize that you're writing to people in that way, you want to tell them that story in a way that captures both their hearts and minds. That you have to have the data and you have to have the details, but weaving stories in there of clients or participants or whatever, and telling that story in an engaging way is I think really, really critical, just to get the reader to want to read it. And also realizing that readers often have a whole pile of grants to read. And so you want to be interesting and engaging in just your style of writing. Okay. A second mistake that I see pretty often is just that you're not taking in the instructions that the funder set out, in their set of instructions. And so it's a really easy fix. You just follow the directions. And you make sure that you are paying attention to, again, the order that they put the grant in, the terminology that they use, all the documents that they want in the way they want it, that kind of thing. And again, more and more with the competition, what you're going to find is, if you didn't follow the directions or if you didn't submit, just one document that they wanted you to submit, you might not even get your grant read because they'll just kick it out before it even goes forward to the review process. So, paying attention to those instructions down to the letter is really, really important because they can just even get kicked out and not even be considered at all because of that, regardless of how good your program is. I also see this a lot, again, where I can tell that somebody just tried to answer the questions in the application without thinking through their project. And then it is just very disjointed, and what was in the beginning doesn't flow to the end. And the best workaround for that is to use something like the Program Planning Framework to plan out your applications. The next one, where'd it go? Okay. The next one is not enough detail. And so again, you want to assume that the reader and the funder knows nothing about you, okay, what you do, who you serve, how you do it, anything. You want to treat them as a blank slate, right? And if you want them to know something, you have to write it in the application, okay? So treat it like somebody who knows nothing about what you're doing is reading about this. Because quite often, they don't know a thing about what you're doing. They're volunteer reviewers. They don't know anything about what a daycare does or what a substance abuse recovery center does or what a domestic violence shelter does. They don't know. And so you have to put enough detail so that they do know. And so that's just a common mistake, and just treat it like a blank slate. And so I have just 3 tips as you are going out there and honing your grant writing skills. And then, like I said, we'll have time for question and answers. But the first tip is just to find a friend, especially at the state level and federal level, if you're looking for grants at that level, and then treating foundations like a partnership, again, not like an ATM machine. That find a friend, find somebody in those whatever area it is, that works at the state level or the foundation level or whatever, and connect with them and ask them for guidance and assistance. And other organizations that get money that are like you, from different organizations, talk to them. Get to know how they developed those relationships and things like that. But work those things. Those are relationship building things, and they take time and that sort of thing. But they can just be invaluable to help you identify what's going on in your community with trends, or at the state level, what's going on in your state and where funding maybe is or is going away. So that just should be part of your overall strategy. A second part of your strategy is just to read successful grants, even if they're not the kind of grants that you're going to be writing, right? Even if it's not the topic that you're writing on. Reading successful proposals really helps me just, look and see, oh, how did they describe that? How did they frame that up? What did I think made that really strong? What struck out, what struck me as being really powerful in this? And that kind of thing, and then modeling after that. So I know that GrantStation does a little competition each year, and then I also have some successful proposals that are publicly available. That they're not mine, but they're publicly available grants. And like I said, even if you're never going to write a grant for a veterans, shelter or whatever it might be that's, or a job training program, like just reading that, even if it's not your topic, I think it just helps us become better. And then my last tip is just becoming a grant reviewer, where at your local level, your community foundations, your United Ways, your state agencies, you can even go up to the federal level and become a grant reviewer. But especially at the local level, you generally don't have to have like any sort of specific content and expertise or whatever. As you go up to the federal level, you generally do. But places like that are always looking for grant reviewers, and as long as you're not applying to them, like during that cycle or whatever, then you can become a reviewer, and it's really eye-opening to see the process from the other side, and then that helps you write with the reviewer in mind, right, as you're writing your applications in the future. So those are kind of our tips and that sort of thing. We'll have questions here in a second, but I do just want to let you know that that manual that Seema talked about is on sale through tomorrow on the website, and it is going through the entire program planning framework. And if you want to order that, you can order a copy of that. So we'll have some time for question and answers.
All right. Thank you, Alice. So we have a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So do you have any advice for getting in front of funders who maintain invitation-only opportunities and creating the opportunity to get invited to submit a proposal?
Yeah, that's always tough, because what happens sometimes with some funders is, some funders put out their request and they say, okay, everybody can apply. And then other funders, they fund just the organizations that they want to fund, right? So they don't allow everybody to apply. So I think a couple of ways that I would try to get in front of those organizations is, use connections first. Look at, if any of your board members or, your volunteers or whatever have any connections with those funders in any way, just to, get a first inroads in. A second way is to, write up something, even a one-page snapshot maybe at first. One quick look at what it is that you're proposing to do and what you want to see changed. And emailing it to them and then saying, here's just a quick look at what we're doing. I was interested to know if, we could provide you with more information or sit down and talk with you about ways that we can, either get in funding with you or, they always say one of the ways to raise money is to ask for advice, right? So start maybe also by asking advice, So here's our program, here's what we're doing, and we're looking for support for X, Y, and Z or whatever. Do you have any advice as to how we could do that? So those are kind of the ways that I would kind of just start to approach it. And sending them a one-pager isn't going to hurt. And then if they just are absolutely not interested, then they'll just say they either won't respond or they'll just say no. And then if they, if it does, pique their attention, then you can provide them with more. But keep it down, keep it to something just really simple, one-pager, to see if you can grab their attention first.
Okay, perfect. So we have another question from Kathleen. Is it fair to ask a funder why your request failed if they give a generic sorry not this year answer?
Yeah, it is. And again, some funders, are going to just kind of be like, I don't want to provide that information. But most of them, will. If you kind of, were asking, how could we make this application better? Where were our weaknesses? Where were our strengths? That kind of thing. I think if you approach them in a way that's not like, why weren't we funded? But more like, oh, I'm really curious how we can get better. Then I think that they're more apt to do that. And then some kind of do it as a matter of course, that they'll provide you with that feedback. But even if they don't provide it as a matter of course, I think asking them for feedback that's a fine thing to do.
Okay, and then we have another question here from Angie. Is there such a thing as providing too much information or documentation for a grant?
I guess I would say that you want to kind of stay within the parameters of what the funder, so they'll generally say limit to 5 pages, or now that more and more grants are going online, you're limited to characters, and word counts and things like that. So I don't generally have a problem with, giving them more than they want if you generally follow their instructions. Because generally they'll have outlined those parameters, and then then you just have to work it within their parameter. But I don't find that that's usually that you're providing them with too much information. I can't really think of, you don't supply them with things that they didn't ask for. I guess that would be one way to think about it. So if they say they want these 3 attachments, and they want your organizational budget and your board of directors and your audit or something like that, then if they don't want letters of support, then don't provide them with things that they don't ask for.
Perfect. Okay. So we have another question from, let's see, I actually don't know who this is from, but they said about 90% of our expenses are related to personnel. A lot of funders say they won't fund salary expenses, but that is our primary expense. How do we work around this?
Yeah, so that is a problem, that some funders won't fund salaries, and so if they have that rule, that's their kind of standard, then there isn't much you can do if that's what you're asking for the funds for, right? If it's just that's what you need. So I think you need to find funders that really see the value in what, again, in funding the salaries. And then I think that, again, they would be more willing generally to fund a piece of a salary as opposed to the whole salary. So that's where any opportunity that you can get to, have an earned income stream, get dollars from somewhere else, where if they can see that, listen, I've got 75% of this covered. If you could cover the last 25%, again, they feel more secure on that than if you're just it's 100% or a huge amount. So looking at your organization's sustainability, in a bigger kind of context, and looking at ways that you might think to where more of your salaries could be covered from other things, if it's fundraisers or this and that. And then even though it is 90%, you're still only asking any one funder for a small piece of that 90%. But that's the way that, that the staffing costs are hard, if you can't find a funder to fund them. And it's a lot of what we need in the nonprofit world. But I'm like, groups that do have any sort of earned income strategy are generally the strongest, because then they can use that money to support that kind of ongoing day-to-day staff time that's needed. And then it's easier to get funds for special projects.
Okay, and then in terms of being more cause-specific, so we have a question from Leslie, and I know I used to work for an arts organization, so I remember this challenge, but she's asking, what about arts organizations? The need is cultural, quality of life, less tangible, immediate than food, shelter, etc. How do you make the strongest case for arts programming and measure how people change as a result?
That's a really great question, and that is a little tougher, right? To figure out how to, measure that kind of a little less tangible change that we might see from those things. But I think that I would. Let me think here. A couple of different ideas that I think I would have on that is look at the way other groups have done it. So going out there and just Googling. And use the term like logic models or outcome measurement for, and then say, drama programs or art programs or whatever it is that, music programs that kind of thing, and see how other people are doing it. Because I think that, if you have a captive audience with what you're doing, if you're providing arts, education in some way, or you're working with the same people over time, then you will be able to demonstrate, that different changes that maybe the people in your program demonstrated. So, you could measure, changes in their academics or their attitudes or their, motivations or whatever, or physical health or whatever it is that might be some sort of outcome of something like that. With the community as a whole, it's a little bit harder, and so that's where, again, I would look at, how other, community organizations have measured that kind of change. And then the next, I think, option is just going to funders who kind of inherently understand the value of those programs, and how, that they generally would tend to fund without maybe you needing to do as much evaluation around that. And, going to, even if it's, even just looking at the federal level or state level of humanities groups and arts people who fund that, and see how they're measuring or asking people to measure change. You know what I mean? And then you can incorporate that into your own measurement system or something. But it is a little harder, when you're looking at a target, a community. How does a community change, or how does, then you're, it's harder than when you have a set group of kids or a group of participants that you can measure their change over time. That's easier, I think.
Okay. And we've gotten a couple questions about follow-up. So what is the best process for following up with a foundation after submitting a proposal?
So I think that, so I would follow up with, so know what their process is, like if, let's say, some don't say it, but most kind of will have like a timeline. So, grants are due at the end of January. We'll be making funding announcements May 1st or something like that. So, if you know that process, if it's, on their website or whatever, don't call them, up in between in between submitting and when they make announcements. Follow, give them the time to do their work. If you don't know, it doesn't hurt to reach out and call them and just say, hey, we submitted this application. We're just curious if you have a time frame, when you expect to make your awards or announcements. And but just don't like, just if it's in their time, in their period of like review, and it's their review period, then I wouldn't follow up with them. I wouldn't bug them. Make sure though that you always give if you get the grant or if you don't get the grant, that you submit like a thank you note. Come back, thank you for at least allowing us to, an email, something. But people generally don't do that, but it really is a best practice to just say, thanks for letting us submit, and that could be for like the person who asked the question before, if you're turned down, kind of coming back with that thank you, and, we're trying to, improve our skills. How can we make our application better in the future? But generally wait their process.
Okay. And okay, so we have another question here. Let's see. We often really get slowed down in the concept note phase. Let's see. Do you have any advice on how to approach this efficiently and effectively, basically hitting all of those boxes in the program planning framework while keeping it to 1 to 2 pages max?
Yeah. So Naomi's question there was like, so sometimes a funder will ask for instead of having you fill out a full application, they'll ask you for like a concept paper or a letter of inquiry or something like that to kind of get the short version of what you do. And then if they like what you do, then they invite you into the process of, filling out the full application. So I'm glad you said that, though. The trick is what you do want to do in general is put everything that was in the program planning framework, right, like all those components, into the grant application, into this letter of inquiry. But again, generally it's pretty short, so you don't have that much time. So I think where I would kind of shave off some of the details in order to get, like, I would go heavier on keep that strength of what you've done in the past, a little bit heavier on the approach and what you're going to do, and then the outcomes that you'll achieve. And I don't think it's as important to put all the evaluation information in there, you know what I mean? Just saying how people are going to change, that kind of thing. You'll put more detail in the full application of how you're going to measure that. I don't think you need to go crazy on the need either. I think that you want to keep that, you might want to make that just a few sentences, or, just like a highlight on top. Here's the big, issue that we're addressing, but you don't have to go into huge amounts of detail on the need. So that's kind of where I think in that inquiry phase I would spend more of my time. Approach, outcomes. Approach and outcomes.
Okay.
I would, yeah.
Okay, awesome. We have a couple more questions. So do you have any advice for funding approaches for startup 501c3 nonprofits?
Yeah, so that's a little bit harder to find funding for. But a couple of things that you probably want to think about is, first, GrantStation. I mean, they went through their thing. You can go in and you can type, you get a subscription, and then you go in, you type in your area, where you live, or where you provide services, and then what your area of interest is. And then I think that they have certain things like startups, or if you're just looking for equipment costs or that kind of thing, or if you're looking for program costs, they have that. So you can find those funders that would maybe specifically be interested in funding a startup. Okay, so you kind of want to start there with those organizations. The second approach that is going to an organization, even if they don't specifically fund startups, you're going to have to tweak your application a little bit more, because you're not going to have that background to show the changes that you've made over time, because you're brand new. So you're not going to be able to talk about that as much. So I think you're going to have to go a little bit heavier into like the need that you're addressing, how you came to form this organization, what's the strengths of the board that you've put together, and the approach that you've developed that you really feel is going to be effective, and why you think it is so important. And you're going to have to be a little bit more kind of theoretical in that, and that kind of thing, but that's the way you're going to have to emphasize things, just because you won't have that past history. But the rest is still going to be the same. I mean, again, you're still going to have how will people change. You're still going to have an evaluation. You're still going to have a budget. You're still going to have, an approach of what you're going to do with your participants, that kind of thing. So in that sense, it doesn't, things don't really change. It's just that you're going to have to emphasize a little bit more, like I said, on how it came to be, what this incredible need is, and this passion that's driving people to start this new organization, and why you think you're going to be effective.
All right, so we have our last question from Jim, and he's asking how much detail of a program is desired in a letter of inquiry?
Yeah, so that's kind of back, to the question Naomi asked a little bit, but I think, again, what you do want to do is you want to generally hit kind of everything that's in your program planning framework, with providing more emphasis on your approach and your outcomes, what you're going to change, and that kind of thing. So generally it's the overview, but you really want that funder to be able to see what you do and your impact. That's what's going to kind of propel you into the next phase of filling out the full application.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you, Alice, for this information, and thank you to the attendees for staying on for the 90 minutes. Just a reminder, we have this $99 Grant Station special offer happening on February 12th and 13th. So if you guys want to sign up for a reminder, the URL is here. And I believe Zareen also just chatted it out to you guys as well. So before we go, I just want to encourage you to take our post-event survey. So any feedback that you have for us really helps. If you have any comments for Alice, definitely let us know. And we definitely want to know what you guys would like to see in the future as well. So please take a few minutes to complete the post-event survey. And if you're on social media, feel free to give TechSoup a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then we also have the TechSoup blog, which is blog.techsoup.org, where we post a lot of how-tos and tips and tricks and things like that. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the recording, the slides, and any relevant links that Alice mentioned. So if you're wanting to see or refer to anything that she talked to you about in today's webinar, you'll have it in your inbox by the end of today. And we have a few webinars that are coming up in February if you're interested in attending. These are all on our website, so feel free to give us a visit and register for our upcoming webinars. We also offer TechSoup courses and TechSoup services in addition to hardware and software. So if you're interested in getting help desk, case support, or managed IT, you can see the link here. And then also we have courses available to you as well. So Alice, I just want to thank you again for today's webinar. Thank you to Zareen and Jamie on the back end for answering all the questions. And thanks to today's participants. And we hope to see you on the next one.
Great. Thank you, everybody.